Thanks, Stephanie. I'm double mic'd this morning, so bear with me as I get my mic packs all set up. It's ridiculous, you know, the more speaking you do, the more microphones they put on you, apparently. All right. I'm American, by the way, so just in case you were wondering, it's not an East London accent. But I do live in the UK. Now, okay. I've been looking forward to this event for a really long time. Thanks for the tweets, by the way. Thanks for not giving away my talk, all my friends in the room. I know you all have been tweeting out things like cats and Star Wars. I can't actually say whether or not that's going to be in the talk just yet. But you may have noticed I tweeted out a photo of our newborn baby. His name is Jude, and he is 31 days old now, which means if my maths are correct, I have had just about 90 hours of sleep. Which, there's only so much coffee you can drink, really, when it comes down to it. So, you know, after a while, you start thinking, I'm a little sleepy, I'm a little tired. What can I do to jazz things up? Well, you just, design-wise, things come off the rails. Can you hear me okay, by the way? Is the microphone okay? Good. Yes, there's going to be some cats. Yes, there might be a little bit of Star Wars. This is a cat and Star Wars on that slide up there. Please, if you want, please tweet away. My username on Twitter is @EricStoller. Autocorrect will destroy my last name. It's going to change it to Stroller. 32 days ago, that was not a legitimate Twitter handle. It's still not today. However, there is a fake Twitter account that someone created years ago @EricStroller, and it's a picture of a pram, and the profile says that it can't go up and down escalators. Now, if you've actually ever been to London, you know for a fact that people take prams up and down the escalators all the time. It's terrifying. I don't think I'm ready for that yet. I'm a new parent. Now, as I said, I am American, and I got to say, what an interesting time to be in the UK, caught between Trump and Brexit. It's like the worst sandwich possible. Every time there's something horrible that happens in America, I think maybe I'll just seek official asylum in the UK, and then that doesn't happen, right? Because man, it's really interesting time. So when I came over to the UK, I had a real issue because I built this consultancy around digital engagement and working with educators, working with students, primarily within HE. And I didn't know anybody in the UK. I didn't have any contacts. I didn't have any relationships, no network whatsoever. And I thought to myself, what am I going to do? How can I get to know all of you in a way that doesn't require me to go to a ton of conferences and spend money that I didn't have? Because at the time, the pound was worth something. And I mean, it's still a pretty good currency. I like that new, what is it, like a 32-sided pound coin now? It's amazing. If you roll it enough times, it's like a Dungeons and Dragons piece dice. So I came over to the UK and I thought, okay, what I'm going to do is a few different things. First of all, because I was a writer for InsideHigherEd.com, and I spelled all my words incorrectly. I spelled favorite without a U, and I didn't use whilst. And so I started using those words to really throw people off. And then the other thing I did, and this a few years ago, this would have been something that we didn't do. Because a few years ago, if I would have come up to you and I said, well, your username Rome0545, that's her name, but I've been following you for a really long time. Now that's slightly creepy. But if you add on Twitter, it's totally acceptable. And so what I started doing is I started following as many people as I could in the sector and just listening and learning. I think the nice thing with social media is you don't have to output, you don't have to say anything. You can just sit back and sort of slow trickle learn what's happening. And in this case, it was all about the UK's higher education sector, finding out what was going on, learning all of your acronyms, learning things like a course isn't the same as a course in the US. You try to trip me up, it's not going to work. I've been in the UK now for 3 years, so I'm dangerous. I know the words. And then the other thing is I went to LinkedIn. Now, how many of you have jobs? The cool thing about LinkedIn, and I lost a lot of you right there. The cool thing about LinkedIn is that it's much more versatile than just sort of an online CV. It's a great place for networking, resource sharing, meeting people. And so what I started to do is I said, You know that thing you're not supposed to do on LinkedIn? Are there any careers or employability people in the room? Where are they at? You know that thing you're not supposed to do on LinkedIn where you don't connect with people that you don't know? Like that's just, you know, it's unheard. So what I did is I said, well, I can't wait for that. I don't have time for that. I'm going to start looking for interesting titles. Really interesting titles and people that look like they might be in the sector. And I thought, you know, that vice chancellor title looks really fascinating to me. Because if you come from the US, if someone's a vice something, vice president, vice provost, vice chancellor, they're not in charge. You know, they're more approachable in that sense. They don't have gatekeepers and whatnot. But I started just LinkedIn requesting all these vice chancellors and pro vice chancellors and deputy vice chancellors. I hope they wear a badge. And LinkedIn requests, right? And then what happened is they would come back to me with messages and saying, have we met? Do I know you? Because, you know, they're very British. Like, they're supposed to, the etiquette, and I'm like, no, I'm breaking all those conventions. And I say, no, I don't, we haven't met yet, you don't know me, and here's what I'm doing. Here is why I'm in this country, why you've let me in, and what I'm up to these days with regards to my work. Now, some people in this room, I guarantee you, are still skeptical about using social media for teaching and learning, student engagement, enhancing the student experience. Any skeptics in here? Yeah. And I can't spell British skepticism either. But here's the thing. This is for you skeptics, this video. I'm going to share this. You're probably going to laugh. I'm going to get depressed. And then we're going to move forward.
Social media is great. It connects you to the world and the people you love. You can chat with your family or share a meal with friends and watch cute little cats do unbelievable things.
Look, she sticks her head out of the box.
Look, she sticks her head out of the box. But there are times when social media can get in the way of the real world. Remember that? It's the thing that happens when you run out of battery. That's why we've developed the Social Media Guard. It takes the social out of media and puts it back into your life. Let's see how it works. The Social Media Guard.
Now, I showed this video to a conference in Texas a few years ago. It was just academic advisors. It was about 500 people. And they almost gave it a standing ovation. And I thought to myself, you know, I have about 45 minutes more content about social media to go, and they want the Social Media Guard. I'm in big trouble. Now, the thing with social media, of course, is it's extremely polarizing. It's the kind of thing where, you know, there's a lot of love, hate, and everything in between, good, bad, and ugly. And I would hope that as we progress throughout this keynote and maybe a conversation later on, is that we get to an idea where learning is at the heart of all this. Lifelong learning is one of those values that we who work with students on a regular basis, we try to espouse that with our students. We try to say, you know, hey, learning doesn't stop the second you leave university, when you get your credential, when you graduate, et cetera. It's something that you're always going to be doing throughout your life. And here's the greatest irony. Because if you work in higher education, you have to love irony, right? You have to. Because there are people, you may know them, who maybe they stopped learning a few years ago, maybe in the 1970s. Lifelong learning is something that should be at the core, at the heart of the university experience. And I think sometimes, by the way, that's a floppy drive for those of you that don't know. Because some people treat this technology as if, you know, it's something, well, it's too modern or what have you. And maybe there's just too many things that are distracting us, or too many apps. Do you ever get intimidated by the number of apps? There's like an anxiety around the fact. And the app, they're always missing a vowel in the name, you know, or it's got 2 extra R's, or it's a silly little cartoon. And it's easy to get intimidated by the apps, I mean, because there's so many of them. And you know, when you talk about social media, as that video indicated earlier, you've got to have cats. And so here's another one. This is the galactic cat. Just ignore the fact that it's there for now. Are there any apps up there that you don't recognize? Any that you haven't seen before? A few head shakes. Okay, what about this one up here? That little, what is that one? Just shout it out. Okay, this is how the nerds identify themselves, all right? We've got, now this is a compliment because I'm really just seeking you out. It's not an insult whatsoever. Reddit looks like it was designed in, what would you say, 1997, optimistically speaking. But you know what? It's a massive, thriving community of users on the web, and there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of interaction, and I guarantee you there are people talking about various courses, subjects, institutions, topics, what have you, on this very massive community called Reddit. So check it out if you haven't checked it out. What about, let's see, anybody know this one over here, the bottom right? Who said Musical.ly? Where? Okay, do you have kids? Yes. Yeah, and how old are your kids?
9, 11, 13.
Okay, and have you done any Musical.ly videos with them?
Yes.
You can predict this kind of thing, right? It's always a parent who...
Really good handstand, it will worth putting on.
Wow. You're trying to go viral. I like how you're sort of pitching. Musical.ly is one of those apps that it's kind of like Dub Smash, and if you think, wow, Eric, you're just saying stuff that I don't understand, that's okay, right? There's a bit of dissonance in learning no matter what. But Musical.ly is kind of silly, would you say? It's kind of, you know, fun, and you think back to maybe when Facebook first came out in 2004, that, you know, we thought of it as silly in the States. We thought of it as never going to be connected to teaching, learning, or even higher education at all. We didn't think digital engagement was something that was going to happen. It was sort of, you're either face-to-face, and that online stuff is silly. It's not connected to reality. Because remember AOL? Some of you, anybody still using AOL mail in here? You're a legend. My father-in-law still uses AOL, and they're staying with us right now, and his computer still does the "You've got mail" prompt with the, it's awesome. Now, that's my first awesome of the day, so give me some credit. But AOL, you remember your username? Your username was what? Your birth year and something like Purple Dragon? And now, your password oftentimes is your AOL username. I know some of you are furiously like changing it really quickly because it was like the greatest identity theft scheme ever. But let's talk now about these modern tools. My apologies. We'll go back to AOL later. But what about this one here, the ghost? Snapchat. Yeah, and how many of you have Snapchat on your phone? And how many of you are too afraid to put it on your phone? Yeah, it'd be like saying you're afraid of the fax or you're afraid of the telephone. You know, these are just communication and engagement channels that we can use to connect with students. And of course, there's Facebook, which now has about 2 billion active users. Facebook is massive. You know, the platforms are growing, evolving. You know, there's messaging apps like WeChat, and a lot of you probably use WhatsApp and maybe Line or Kik. Any Canadians in here? Okay, I'm sorry. No, apologies are a thing, right? It's okay. Canadian, it's like really lowbrow Canadian humor. Okay. LinkedIn. And what about Pinterest? Are any of you using Pinterest? Yeah, you endless scroll, right? Endless scroll. And then what happens is 6 hours later, you know how to make amazing chocolate chip cookies, like a wide array. Yeah. Or my favorite one, though, on Pinterest are all the boards, in case you get married, like I'm going to get married someday board. They're like the height of optimism on Pinterest. But don't get intimidated by all these apps, because they are changing. I mean, the humanity is all about the evolution of the ways in which we connect. You think about cave paintings, you know, and how long those have lasted. And then we've got Banksy, sort of the modern equivalent of the cave painter today. So our apps are changing, they're shifting. What about this one up here, the eyeball? I made that one up. It's totally fake. Simon should know this one. So that's actually Weibo. That's a really popular Chinese social network. Because you think about a lot of the apps that are in use predominantly in, say, the UK or the US, they come from the West. They come from California a lot of times. And a lot of our students are coming from countries outside of that scope in terms of being blocked from accessing Facebook or Twitter. You know, the Great Firewall of China is a real thing. And some of you are thinking, well, he just made that up too. No, that's a real website. You can actually, if you want, let me Google that for you as a URL. You can share that link with someone. Okay, so let me Google that. You know what I'm talking about? Let me Google that for you. Could someone let me Google that for you? Let me Google that for you and tweet it out. That'd be a really good meta tweet. Now, I talk a lot about Twitter. I talk a lot about Twitter because Twitter is extremely versatile. We're using it right now on the board over here and over here. Sometimes I get a little too excited about Twitter. I asked my son, I said, Jude, could you try it out? He couldn't get Touch ID to work. He's failing already with technology. But Twitter is one of those things where it can represent the tip of the iceberg for engagement, for resource sharing, curation, networking. You can use it in a lot of ways. And I talked about Twitter about a year ago at a conference, and I took a lot of heat for it. I got a lot of critiques. People were saying, all he does is talk about Twitter and how it's wonderful and a gateway into conversations and networking and connection with students and universities, and it can flatten hierarchies, it can be used for activism, and of course all those critiques were posted on Twitter. Irony, of course, irony. We love irony. Now, if you ask Jack about why Twitter is good, why it's special, why it matters, of course he'll say it's one of those things that it shows people things that they couldn't get necessarily elsewhere, at least in a speedy way. Now, do any of you know Simon Lancaster? He might even be in here. I don't know Simon. We have never met in person, but I can tell you right now he's a scientist. And he was asked, Simon was asked, what's the value of Twitter? What do you really get out of Twitter? Why does Twitter matter? And he said, I'm going to read it verbatim. He said, Twitter enables a multi-threaded, polypeopled, instantaneous conversation across the internet. Now, I don't know about you. I don't know anybody else who talks like that. And Twitter has given me the capacity to meet people outside of the realm of people that I might meet sort of day to day, face to face. And I love that. I love the fact that it is the jumping off point for a lot of different things. Tech guy, can I walk over here? Okay, cool. You never know. There's certain Or this one, do any of you follow NHS on Twitter, at NHS? Few of you, very few, limited to one. It's amazing. So what the NHS does, and it's kind of a teaching tool and it's kind of a community engagement tool, what they do is they let a different member of their community run the account. Could be a medical practitioner, could be someone who's been a patient of the NHS for a while, could be someone who's still waiting in A&E. Now, a little while ago, they let Mr. Shafi Ahmed. He's someone you don't want to really ever meet. He's a laparoscopic colorectal surgeon. I mean, you want to meet him if you really need that, but typically not someone you're really excited to see. And he actually live tweeted a surgery. Of course, he got through all the confidentiality and privacy issues. I mean, it wasn't like they just opened up a phone and started live tweeting, taking selfies with the person on the table. But what an amazing thing, because all of a sudden now it opened up the fact that here's what's happening in this surgery, here's what's going on, here's some of the process, here's some of the things that were said and done. And I don't know Jonathan Cliff, but I saw this tweet and he said, social media at its best, proof that Twitter can be used as an educational tool at NHS live tweeting from theater. Really neat stuff. And I know some of you might be interested in medicine or medical education, and if you're an aspiring doctor or if you're a student and you're thinking, this is what I want to do, here's just a really quick way to use social media to share that with people, to share how they did it. And I know Shafi, you can follow him, he has a separate Twitter account, but he posted a photo recently where he was surrounded by this whole bank of cameras. It was like bullet time from The Matrix. And he was getting, I think, like a 3D virtual avatar of himself so that he could do surgeries. It's all getting very Star Trek-y. Really, if you ask me, which is perfect because have you seen the HEA's logo? It is so, It is so Star Trek-y, I can't even. I thought to myself, I'm just doing this for the kicks. If you don't know what this means, it's not a gang sign. I put Jude's fingers like that, and they just wouldn't stick. So I'm hoping he develops the muscle memory. That's quality parenting right there. Here's a real-world example, though, from HE, where in the sciences, I think it was the University of Nottingham, U of N Biosci Career, they held a synchronous hashtag-based conversation with academics, staff, and students to talk about science, to talk about careers in science. It was a fantastic way to get students connecting, and these could be people all over the world, with scientists. And Twitter, it didn't have to be Twitter, it just happened to be that this is what they used. 10 years from now, it won't be Twitter, it'll be something else. It'll be like the Jetsons, you know? If you want, the cool thing about this too is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can go search on Twitter for this hashtag, BiosciProfSkills, and you could see all the conversations, all the interactions. You could see all the questions that were asked. You could see what people said. It's a great resource and a set of artifacts there that are readily available for you all. But the thing about social and digital, of course, is that it takes time. And you have to prioritize your time. We all have the same amount. And prioritizing time is important. And I think that can be a challenge, right? We have to make time, because how many of you, sort of the idea of doing more with less is a bit pervasive, or you're already kind of booked. And it's important to think about how you carve out time to learn new things, because you have to embed it into your routine. Case in point, how many of you checked email this morning while lying down in the dark with the short power cord, because you couldn't be bothered to buy the more expensive one? Yeah. So you're kind of anchored, yeah. And then a lot of you, did you have the night mode on for your phone? Because if you didn't, it's too bright, which means you're lying in the dark, one eye open, and you know what I mean? You're one eye open, yeah. And it's always convenient for just one side, right? Yeah. Were you on your left side? Of course, yeah. If you're right-handed, yeah. I was there. No, you can predict certain behaviors, and you build these into your routine. You're checking email in the dark with one eye open, and how did you get from before you did that to, yeah. Well, that's. We don't need to know the details here. I mean, like it was a nice microfiber duvet. No, it's how we get from not checking email on a regular basis to getting to check it. Yeah, that was a really good answer, by the way. It's okay. It's okay. It's my accent. It's difficult. But I mean, it's all about that building it in so you don't think about it anymore. Building it in so it's seamless. People always ask me, how do I get better at using social media for X, Y, and Z? I did that all just for you. It hurts my linguistic muscles to do that. But you build it in. It's got to become routine. If you think about social media in the context of teaching and learning, in the context of digital engagement as extra, it'll never be as good as your ability to check your email in the dark with one eye open. Yeah. And then you open the other eye and you can't even see because the whole light balance is off. Yeah. So what else can we use social media for? How can it be beneficial? Well, I don't know about you, but we exist right now in a time when there's a lot of misinformation on the web, a bit of fake news. Critical thinking is massively important in any part of our lives. And with all things digital, where things can be photoshopped, information literacy is extremely important. Good grief. I mean, did you see the tweet with Donald Trump posted with CNN and overlay? What a joke. Anyway. It's July 5th now, right? I dumped tea in the river yesterday, and I'm back in Britain today. But yeah, critical thinking skills are massively important. I mean, people sometimes don't think. Like even my dad, I love him to death, but sometimes he says the best things, as he's stalking me on Facebook, but won't get his own account because he has to use my mom's account, and then says he doesn't like technology when I ask him about it. Critical thinking does matter. And I think sometimes we get a little bit overwhelmed by all the tech hype and all the gadgets and gear and latest things and the buzzwords. And that's you know, I understand that. Because you look at things from Gartner, and you can't even read this. It's totally washed out, but that's OK. I'll share the slides later. Or this sort of set of articles here. You know, this is from Simone. Simone is at Imperial College, and I love this title of this article. It's fantastic. Lectures as archaic as bloodletting in an era of modern medicine. You have to read that, right? You have to click on it. But then you have to think about, you know, is this legitimate? Are there leeches involved? Did Shafi Ahmed come around? You know, it's important to think about. Or this one from Wonky. Technology-enhanced learning is finally taking off. It's got the space shuttle. Okay, if you put a space shuttle graphic with an article, I'm skeptical. All right, because we've had technology-enhanced learning for a long time. You know, it's not like we were just like cave people a few days ago, just inventing the wheel and making fire. So I like to do very scientific Twitter polls. And of course, the majority of people who responded said that they use social networks for posting pictures of cats. But they did all these other things too: research, professional development, teaching and learning. Because I think the issue with social media is it's so polarizing because we all use it differently as individuals, and we can all use it differently in the context of our day-to-day work with students in our teaching and learning capacity. And you can, I apologize, dog people, but most of us, it's a cat thing on the web, historically anyway. So how can we use social media, first of all, to include cats, but also we can use it to build community? How many of you work at an online-only institution? A few of you. And those students will never set foot on your campus. And so how do you get that sense of community? How do you get that sense of belonging and space and togetherness? And I know it's I'm getting a little bit like touchy-feely, it's the American coming out. But how do you build communities on your campuses? Or at the very least, how do you connect with students when there's only one of you and there's always going to be a lot more of them? And I think that social media enables you to build community in a variety of ways. And if you need examples, there's countless ways that people are doing this at institutions already. But I love the fact that social media breaks down these silos. It lets us connect with people that sometimes in a face-to-face environment we might not be able to connect to. It lowers and flattens hierarchy. I think that's probably one of the most powerful aspects of social media in the context of higher education is it flattens hierarchy. It allows you to connect with people. It allows students to connect with other people. It's an animated GIF. It's just on replay. If you want, I can give you the file later. Okay. I borrowed it from Google. You may have heard of them. Another aspect about building community that I think is just extremely important and valuable and has sort of a long history of use are hashtags on Twitter. How many of you have participated in a hashtag-based conversation on Twitter? And for the rest of you with your arms crossed, I see your body language. Those nonverbals, right? It's okay. The LTHE chat is a great example of an asynchronous and synchronous conversation on Twitter that is specifically about learning and teaching in higher education. It came out of the UK. My friend Sue Bex tweeted this out about it. It happens as a synchronous conversation on Wednesday evenings at 8 p.m. And the great thing about this is because it's in the UK, if this happened in the States, if there was a Twitter-based conversation with academics, it would happen during the day, typically. But because it's the UK, and I think social media hasn't quite yet been embedded into the day-to-day workflow, it happens in the evening. But that's great because everybody's drinking. They're tweeting out their glasses of wine beforehand, and the topics include things like retention and assessment, everything having to do with HE and higher education in the UK. And if you want, you can just troll it and listen and see what people are saying. You can go back now and check and see what people are sharing and saying. And you get to meet people, too, that way. You get to network with people who maybe have similar interests or are also sort of themselves digital champions in a way. And it's fantastic. Now, I think we'd all agree that digital literacy and digital capabilities are important. When the iPhone ringtone goes off, we all, it's like Pavlovian, you know. You're in Starbucks. I know some of you don't like Starbucks. But you know, you're in the coffee shop and the phone goes off and you touch your pocket because you think it might be you. Well, I heard someone's phone go off even outside the door, and I had to like, my phone's over there. But digital capability and digital literacy is important. But here's the nugget, the truth with regards to this. Now, this is my son, Jude Gregory Stoller. And he didn't write this. I wrote it for him. But in 2001, Mark Prensky wrote just a document that has just had legs and been all over the world and back around the idea of digital natives and digital immigrants. And it's stuck. It has stuck as if everyone got a tattoo on their forehead of it. And what's really ironic is that it's really weird that people are taking pictures of my son right now, but it's okay. But what's ironic, of course, is that Mark Prensky himself, he has countered his own work. He came back and said, you know what, my bad, didn't mean to, but no one read that. It's like they didn't care anymore. They got what they needed from him because it made people feel good. It made people feel good about the fact that they could sort of say, you know what, I'm going to be like Eric's dad and I'm going to print email. He does that to this day. You know, or I'm going to say, students, they have this, they've got this fluency. But the reality, of course, is that there's no such thing as a digital native. No one is inherently a digital native. It's just not a thing. It's not real. It's about a fluency and a spectrum and a continuum. And age does not dictate your ability with all things digital. Let that sink in. At Staffordshire University, Liz Barnes, who's their vice chancellor, she's one of those VCs that I connected with on LinkedIn. She's trying to talk about the idea that they're going to build the use of social media into performance management. How do you think that would go over, mandating social media use? Yeah, so maybe that wouldn't work so well. But I like the moxie behind that idea. Right? Because you're forcing the organization to learn new things. Because let's face it, on your CV, how many of you have Microsoft Office skills? No one knows how to use Access, right? A few of you maybe. Or Excel skills, come on. Yeah. I think there's no benchmark, really, with regards to digital literacy and digital capability. And I think it's important to try to build it in, at least in some ways. For example, Thomas Lancaster, he said that some universities are considering participation in this LTHE chat hashtag that I mentioned as part of their staff appraisal process. So not mandating it necessarily, but saying, hey, if you do this, this will actually be part of this process, something you could add to the mix that we will recognize. And I thought that was a really good idea. Because if you ask people, again, very scientifically, on Twitter, should universities teach digital citizenship skills? Yeah, most people think so. What that looks like, how that falls together, obviously is going to be very different at each institution, person to person. But it's still something to consider. Now, I know that your minds are blown when you read this tweet. Please feel free to use the Bill Nye mind blown GIF. It's probably one of my favorite ones. If you're interested in GIFology, I just made that word up. But staff need digital capability and literacy in order to teach it, in order to implement it. A lot of institutions talk about digital transformation. They talk about getting more digital or being more digital in a variety of ways. And yet, if staff don't have that, if that's not part of the equation, then how can you teach it? How can you incorporate it into your work? Now, if you're looking for some great resources on digital capabilities and digital literacy, look no further than JISC. JISC has these fantastic models on digital literacies as well as digital capabilities. The capability one is on the right-hand side. And again, if you Google those, they have breakdowns of each one to sort of say, okay, this is how you can incorporate this into your work, into your teaching practice, or into the big picture part of your organization with regards to digital transformation. Now, I was really excited when Stephanie brought up employability in her intro, because a few years ago, gosh, I tweeted about employability, and people got upset with me. And they said, universities are about knowledge. And I said, yeah, but you can't eat that. Knowledge tastes great. I just had some. It's fantastic. But it might lead to employability or being employed. It might lead to your career development. But I think it's important when you think about critical thinking and the conversation around what higher education is for in the context of things like widening participation and access, employability is a big part of it. And I think that it still and does very much matter. Now, I asked earlier how many of you have jobs. And I talked about LinkedIn. And people don't necessarily always like LinkedIn. They might think of it this way. Spoiler alert, he is his father. And if you didn't know, you've had what is it, 37 years? So, sorry, my apologies. Just ruined a whole thing for you. One of the stats that Pew came out with, though, that I thought was really fascinating was the fact that younger people in the cohort from 18 to 29 aren't necessarily on LinkedIn. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that the younger you are, the more invincible you are. You know what I mean? Like some of you, remember when you just could do anything and it didn't matter? Like if I had a baby when I was 19, sleep wouldn't have been as important as it is now when I'm 40 and I'm just dragging. So, how do we get our students on LinkedIn, or how do we get them thinking about employability and career development early on? Because when someone is 18 or 19 and they're invincible, they're not thinking about using these channels. And so we're role modeling. So you might not be on LinkedIn for your own job search aspirations, but you're role modeling the current social network that is connected to employability. It's the one that we use right now in the here and now. But you're role modeling to students how to use it. And how many of you work in induction? Any orientation induction people here at all? That's a big part of it because students get a lot of material, right? They get a lot of, usually it's on fluorescent pink paper or green, is the color, and they maybe recycle that if you're lucky. But how do you get students to use the apps and start thinking about their own development early on so that where are my career people at again? There's one. What happens with students is they wait until graduation, like the day before, to come and talk to you. And they say, hey, I need some help with this thing about the JLB. And you say, I've been here the whole time. Where were you? Yeah, so maybe early on, start getting that conversation going and flowing about LinkedIn, or in the future, who knows what it'll be something else. Because it's all connected to the student experience. I'm going to be debating teaching excellence later on this evening after you all have had a lot of wine. And I'll be drinking espresso. And the student experience does matter, though. And it's not just for those. It's not necessarily about TEF. How many TEF Golds do we have in here? Any TEF Gold? Yeah, it's like a form of petrol. No impurities at all. I just filled my car up with TEF Gold today. It was fantastic. It ran forever. Yeah. TEF Gold, bronze, and silver. Welcome to the Olympics. Because one thing that we know is that the more engaged our students are with their university, the more successful they're going to be. And I think as TEF, which doesn't really measure teaching anyway, has shown us, is that it's about more of this holistic sense of the student experience. It's about the ways in which students connect with their university and all of you throughout their entire journey. So the more engaged they are, and you can be engaged with them face-to-face and on social media. It's not a and or zero-sum kind of thing. I think part of the issue with digital engagement is people think, well, that's it now. I can't talk to people face-to-face. I just have to do it on the app. You do both. You engage in both places. Because what we do, IRL, in real life, matters both face-to-face and online. It used to be we would sort of disconnect the two, but now they're very much connected. So I asked students, I said, what are the apps that you use, or what are your students using? This is another Twitter poll. And you may notice on this Twitter poll that the apps that I've selected aren't Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, it's Instagram, WhatsApp, Snapchat. Because these are the apps that are being used today by students who may end up using them in modules and in their course and in the workplace later on. And it's important to think about, okay, maybe these are the apps that you all will use in your work with students. Now, sometimes there's a bit of a stigma with Snapchat, as Rosie indicates here with her tweets about going to DigiFest and saying that, you know what, I probably won't use Snapchat. Yeah, Too many proper grown-ups there. I don't even know what that means. But again, when I asked how many people use Snapchat, a good number of you did, but I asked how many of you people don't use Snapchat because you're afraid of it or maybe you don't want to have it on your phone. A lot of people don't have it on their phones. If you learn how Snapchat works, then you can essentially learn how Instagram stories work, because Facebook stole everything that Snapchat is doing. And if you look at the stats, a lot of young people worldwide are using Snapchat. It's very popular. And the University of Limerick First 7 Weeks program actually uses Snapchat as part of the first-year experience to support students. You think about, well, it's ephemeral. Well, you know what? A lot of our conversations are ephemeral. It's not like you're lecture capturing conversations with students that you have. So think about how you can curate and maybe introduce things and ask questions and provide support in a very ephemeral daily story way. Because our students aren't necessarily looking at content on big screens. You know, how many of you have a desk? Yeah, and how many of our students have desks? A few, right? But most of us in this room, we access content on a big screen, and most of our students access content on a small screen. And so how do we think about what we're doing in our work and our teaching and learning capacity with how our students are accessing those materials? You know, when you've seen something or you've created something that looks great on a big screen, and then you look at it on your phone, and you're doing this constantly? Not really good for mobile devices, especially if you think about the stats. Mobile is just exploding. It's getting to be massive in terms of use. I think oftentimes, though, the perception of risk outweighs the reality of the reward. People perceive that they can't do these things. How many of you have read the social media guidelines for your university? You had trouble sleeping? Yeah. But it's good to at least know that they exist. You know, those guidelines, those documents that can tell you, what your institution is thinking about how you can use social media. That can matter. And then you could say, okay, here's what they say, and then here's what I'm going to do. And that's okay. You know, even though you're all on the same team, you can kind of go off. And because I've found that if you do something and it's successful, and it leads to more student engagement, it leads to a higher sense of student satisfaction or better retention rates, that no one's going to care if you just happen to be using Snapchat, and they might not necessarily think that it's a good thing. So get on there. The other thing is, and I mentioned this earlier, is you don't have to say anything. You want to learn this stuff, you want to figure out how it works, you don't have to go in there and start blabbing and posting right away. Sue Beckingham, a good friend of mine right now, is on holiday, so she couldn't be here, so shout out to Sue. And she tweeted out a guest blog post from students who were essentially sharing ways in which they themselves, these students, thought social media could be used in the higher education experience. It was a great blog post, lots of resources, lots of different tools and channels, and written by students, which, again, that's what you want. Now, I opened up with my slide with the Apple computer with the idea that this is all about always learning. And I think there was a talk yesterday. Was it Allison who was talking about play? Who was talking about play? It was Allison? Yeah, Allison Jones. And James. I'm a little sleep deprived. You've got to bear with me here. But she was talking about, the idea that play is important and play matters. And I think that when you're young, you play with things. It's how you learn. You make a mistake here or there, but you pick yourself back up and you go from there. And I think a lot of times with digital, we're so afraid of that first step, up. And so, you know what? Take a chance. Download. How many of you downloaded Snapchat during this talk? Cowards. All right? Just get some apps that maybe are on my Galactic Cat slide and take them for a spin. And you know what? You don't have to reinvent the wheel because people are already doing impressive things with this stuff. Your institutions are using these apps for marketing and comms, and how do you tie into that? Because the cool thing about social media is that we're all part of that voice right now. It's not as if it's just marketing and comms telling students or prospective students or parents what the institution is about. You all are telling students and sharing information to students about what the institution is all about. So it's okay. So yeah, get in there. Get in that sandbox. Or where are my other New Zealanders in here? Yeah, sandpit. You would call it more of a sandpit, right? Okay. You got to make sure it's culturally appropriate. So I think I have about 14 minutes. What I'd like to do I would like to open this up for questions, and thank you for listening.